Hello everyone, welcome to Research Area Series episode. Today's topic is Migration Studies in English Literature. Migration studies explores themes of displacement, identity, exile, and the experiences of migrants across cultures and borders. This field analyzes how literature represents migration, focusing on the emotional, social, and political challenges of moving from one place to another and how migration reshapes individual and collective identities. Key themes in migration studies: displacement and exile. Literature often portrays migrants' sense of displacement and exile, highlighting their struggles to adapt to new cultures while feeling estranged from their homeland. The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri explores a tension between cultural heritage and assimilation, following a family of Indian immigrants in the US as they navigate identity and belonging. Cultural identity and hybridity. Migrant literature frequently addresses questions of cultural identity and hybridity, exploring how migrants balance multiple identities and cultures. The notion of being in between is often central to these works. In White Teeth by Zadie Smith, characters of different migrant backgrounds struggle with maintaining their cultural roots while adapting to life in modern Britain. Memory and nostalgia. Memory plays a significant role in migration literature as migrants often reflect on their past life in their homeland, evoking nostalgia for what has been left behind while confronting the challenges of their new environment. Season of Migration to the North by Taib Zeli reflects on the protagonist's return to Sudan after studying in England, juxtaposing colonial legacies and personal identity. Home and belonging. The concept of home is a central theme in migration literature as characters negotiate their sense of belonging between the places they leave and the places they arrive in. Literature often questions the meaning of home for migrants. Bricklane by Monica Ali tells a story of a Bangladeshi woman who migrates to the UK, exploring how she comes to redefine her understanding of home and identity in her new surroundings. Racism and xenophobia. Migrant literature frequently addresses the issues of racism, discrimination, and xenophobia that migrants face in their host countries. These works critique societal structures that marginalize migrants and portray the personal toll of such prejudices. Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie delves into the experiences of African immigrants in the US, focusing on the protagonist's navigation of race, identity, and belonging. Economic migration and labor. Economic migration is another important theme with literature exploring how migrants seek better opportunities abroad, often facing exploitation, precarious living conditions, and the harsh realities of working in foreign lands. In Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri, the lives of Indian immigrants in the US and India are explored, focusing on their struggles with identity, work, and family dynamics in foreign lands. Trauma and resilience. Migration literature frequently explores the trauma associated with migration, whether through forced displacement due to war, persecution, or economic hardship. These works also highlight the resilience of migrants as they rebuild their lives. Exit West by Mohsin Hamid portrays the lives of refugees who flee their war-torn homeland through magical doors, illustrating the trauma of migration alongside the hope for a better future. Diasporic communities. Many works of migration literature examine the formation of diasporic communities, focusing on how migrants create new identities while preserving cultural traditions in foreign lands. The Inheritance of Loss by Kiran Desai explores the experiences of Indian migrants in the UK and the US, highlighting their fractured identities and sense of displacement in foreign cultures. Globalization and transnationalism. Migration literature also addresses the effects of globalization and transnationalism, reflecting on how borders become fluid and how migrants negotiate their identities across multiple nations. The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy touches on the effects of globalization in India and the migrations of its characters, creating a narrative that moves between local and global context. Language and communication. Language is often a critical theme as migrants face barriers to communication in their new environments. Literature explores how language shapes identity, belonging, and alienation. Lost Children Archive by Valeria Leslie centers on language migration and the American immigration system, emphasizing how communication and storytelling affect migrant experiences. Now, let's see the critical approaches in migration studies: post-colonial theory, diaspora studies, transnationalism, cultural studies, and trauma studies. Notable scholars and theorists are Homi K. Bhabha, Stuart Hall, Edward Said, Avatar Bha. Now let's see the key terms in migration studies: diaspora, exile, transnationalism, hybridity, identity crisis, alienation, belonging, displacement, cultural memory, post-colonialism, assimilation, refugees, borderlands, migrant labor, globalization, multiculturalism, home, and nostalgia. Okay, now we are moving on to the important section of today's episode, that is possible research topics related to migration studies. Topic 1: Narratives of exile and return in post-colonial literature. Here you have to explore the theme of exile and return in works by post-colonial authors, focusing on the emotional and psychological impacts of displacement. Next, migration and identity in contemporary British literature. Analyze how modern British authors depict migrant experiences with a focus on identity formation and the challenges of assimilation. Next topic: hybridity and cultural conflict in diasporic literature. Investigate how characters in diasporic literature navigate cultural hybridity and the conflicts arising from dual identities. Next, the representation of refugees in 21st century fiction. Study how refugee characters are portrayed in contemporary literature with an emphasis on themes of survival, trauma, and hope. Next is migration memory and the construction of home in African literature. Explore how African authors use the theme of migration to examine the concepts of home and cultural memory. Next, gender and migration, women's experiences in migrant literature. Focus on the unique experiences of female migrants in literature, exploring how gender intersects with migration and identity. Displacement and alienation in immigrant narratives. Study the psychological and emotional impact of displacement and alienation in immigrant narratives, particularly in American fiction. Next is transnationalism and globalization in Indian diasporic literature. Examine how Indian diasporic writers engage with themes of transnationalism and globalization in their works. The role of food and memory in migration literature. Investigate how food becomes a symbol of cultural memory and identity in migrant narratives, preserving links to homeland and tradition. Next topic is language and identity in migrant narratives. Study the relationship between language and identity in migrant literature, particularly how characters navigate bilingualism or linguistic displacement. Migration and trauma, the aftermath of war in literature. Explore the theme of trauma in post-war migration literature, focusing on how characters cope with the scars of conflict and displacement. Children of immigrants in young adult fiction. Analyze the experiences of second-generation immigrants in young adult literature with a focus on identity, belonging, and cultural tension. Borders and boundaries, the politics of migration in literature. Investigate the political dimensions of migration in literature, examining how borders and boundaries are portrayed and contested. Next topic is migrant labor in global south literature. Explore the representation of migrant labor in literature from the global south, focusing on the themes of exploitation, survival, and resistance. And the last topic is reimagining the homeland, nostalgia, and memory in diasporic literature. Study how diasporic writers reimagine their homelands through nostalgia and memory, exploring the tension between idealized and real memories. So that's all for today.
Bye.